Ashley Bookstrom, and I am back with another video. So today's video is super late. I mean, I'm sure that a lot of people have already done this video where they talk about the best and the worst books of 2020 so far. I probably should have done this in like July. It's now September, and then you need to ask yourself, how much does Ashley really care? I don't care at all. So I still think this is going to be something that's going to be fun to look at because of the fact that we're looking at what are my favorites right now as of September, and we still have to make it all the way through September, October, November, and December for me to really feel like, are these books going to stay in their positions of favorites, or am I going to have some books that are going to take over? Are these the worst books that I have read this year, or are there going to be more that are more horrible than some of these that I have read? So we're going to go ahead and take a look. We're going to start with the worst books because I just can't imagine finishing out the video in such a negative space. So we're going to do the worst books first, and then we're going to go into the best books. So sit tight. If you have any of these as your favorites that are my worst, don't take it personal. I just didn't vibe with what the author was putting out. So the first one that I have on my list is Pumpkinheads by Rainbow Rowell, and this was a graphic novel that won the best graphic novel category for Goodreads in 2019. Why? I don't know, because holy crap, it was so bad. I think when I rated it, I gave it 2 stars. It was so predictable, and it's so hard when you're working in graphic format, whether it's a graphic novel, comic, or manga. It's so hard because you have to be very mindful of how you do your storytelling, because you have less time and space to tell your story than a prose novel. And I don't think that Rainbow Rowell really utilized that information in the correct way, because I knew what was going to happen by the time we hit page 40, and then I was reading an extra 100+ pages for absolutely no reason. The only reason why I finished it is because I thought that the artwork was beautiful. It was absolutely stunning, but it wasn't enough to save the book. I feel like we read this whole book to watch these 2 characters figure out whether they wanted to be together or not, and we already knew the answer to the question. If there was something else that maybe would have given us a little bit of a hiccup as to maybe why they could have or could not have been together, like more plot, maybe, but there was nothing. It was dry and it was boring. And I am very critical of any graphic work that I read. I'm like that with all graphic work, so this was no exception. I still don't understand how it won Best Graphic Novel for Goodreads in 2019, other than the fact that I think the Goodreads books of the year end up being more so like popularity contests than actual substance of the book, but that's another topic for another day. The next one that I have is The Wedding Date by Jasmine Guillory, and this is a fan favorite, and I absolutely disliked it. This is another one that I ended up giving 2 stars, and I did not care for this one because of the miscommunication trip that happened. It's just not my thing, especially in this setting. I felt like the characters just were forced into positions where they couldn't speak their minds, when actually that's kind of who they were as people. It was just a very strange dynamic. And then one of the things that really bothered me is that Jasmine Guillory seemed like she wanted to step into possibly discussing the conversations that happen around interracial dating, and it was like she just skimmed the surface and she didn't want to dive deep, and she had the opportunity to do so. It was just very formulaic, and I know that romance can be that way, but this to me just wasn't executed well, and I was just bored reading it. There wasn't anything that I liked about it. I didn't connect with the characters. I didn't connect with their romance. I just didn't feel great about reading it. So like I said, I think I ended up giving that one 2 stars, and I'm never going to pick up the rest of the series. I think the 4th or 5th book in this came out this year, and people who loved the first one don't really care for subsequent books, so I can't imagine me not liking the first one and then thinking I'm gonna like the subsequent books. That just doesn't make any sense. The next one that I have is not necessarily like worse. So some of these are more disappointments than just the worst books that I've read, but we're just gonna lump everything together. So the next one that I have is actually one of the most disappointing books that I read this year, and that is Children of Virtue and Vengeance by Tomi Adeyemi. And the reason why I put this on this list is because I'm a huge fan of Children of Blood and Bone. I loved it when it first came out. I love my reread, and I bought this, the Barnes & Noble exclusive edition, when it came out in December of 2019. The day it came out, I went and I bought it because I was so excited to read it. I felt like we had been waiting so long because the date for this kept getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. I think it got pushed back 3 times. So when the release date finally was set in stone, I was like, oh, I'm so excited to read this one. And it was such a huge disappointment. It was like 2 different authors wrote Children of Blood and Bone and Children of Virtue and Vengeance. I feel like Tomi was in a different place when she wrote this book, because the characters that we saw in the first book were not the characters that we see in this book. They're just completely different. And I feel like she put her characters through traumatic experience for the sake of putting her characters through traumatic experiences to move the plot along. And I don't like when authors do that. It feels forced. It doesn't feel like it's happening organically. And that's exactly how this book read and felt. It felt inorganic. It felt like we definitely were seeing situations where characters would not have naturally behaved in those ways. So I was super disappointed, super disappointed. And I'm so glad, I hate to say this, but I'm so glad I didn't buy the exclusive Waterstones edition, because I had it sitting in a cart and I was like, I'm gonna get it, I'm gonna get it, I'm gonna get it. And I'm glad I didn't get it because I didn't like it. I didn't care for it. I was disappointed. If you want to know more of my thoughts about this one, I do have a spoiler reread vlog where I reread Children of Blood and Bone, and then I read Children of Virtue and Vengeance, and you can see like my happiness about the series just builds, and it's like I reach this peak, and then as soon as I pick up this book, it just goes straight downhill from there. So yeah. And I think I ended up giving this one 2 stars as well. Y'all will notice too, like the books that I don't like, of course, I don't own. So that's going to be the only one that I physically have a copy of. All these other ones I don't have. I don't have physical copies of. Why would I? It would take up space for something that I didn't enjoy. So the next one that I have is Catherine House. And I still, to this day, I heard Catherine House probably in May or June of this year. I'm thinking May. I'm pretty sure it was May of this year. I read Catherine House and I hated it, and I still don't know what the purpose of that book was. I don't get it. I didn't get the plasma shit. I just don't get anything about that book. It is very strange. I felt like it was a waste of like 10-11 hours of my life that I'm never going to get back because I listened to it on audiobook. And I felt like I was high and drunk the entire time we're reading the book, because our main character was drunk the entire time. She was like in this haze the entire time, and it was constantly her drinking and doing random stuff and having sex. And I was like, well, what's the purpose of the book? Like, I didn't get it. And I know there are quite a few people who enjoyed it. Like, I know like Liv gave it 4 stars. Shout out to Liv, because I don't know how, like, I just couldn't get down with that book. It supposedly takes place at this boarding school where these kids come and they basically give up everything, communication, and they're focused on getting this elite education. But then it's like these strange things were happening at the school, but then I still don't get what those strange things were. When there was a big reveal, it really wasn't a big reveal. It was just weird. And I like weird books, but this was weird to the point where it was like, it didn't make any sense. Nothing about it made sense. It made you feel like I just wasted X amount of time of my life reading this book and there was no purpose to it at all. So I definitely am disappointed by that one. That one was just horrible. Probably one of my least favorite books of the year, to be honest. That book is going to make it on the final list for the year. It will, without a doubt. Next one I have is A Blade So Black by L.L. McKinney. And this is not necessarily the worst book that I've read, but it was disappointing. It was just not what I was looking for. It was a Alice in Wonderland retelling, but mixed in with like Buffy the Vampire Slayer type vibes. And it's about this girl who loses her father, which is not a spoiler. It's at the very beginning of the novel. And she gets dumped into this Wonderland type world where she has to fight these creatures that feed off of depressing and sad emotions of humans. But what was so strange about this entire novel for me was that there was a lack of world building. We literally go from her having no idea that this world exists to being thrown into it in a matter of like 10-15 pages, and we have no idea what this world is like. And then there was this lack of her being able to deal with trauma related to her father's death, which I feel like was a problem because that's exactly what these evil creatures fed off of. These traumatic and sad and depressing situations, these human emotions, and our main character never dealt with her human emotions. So it did make sense to have that conversation about human emotions, and then your main character just completely ignores that whole entire it was just one of those things where I feel like she didn't follow through, and it would have been a great novel had she followed through on the conversation surrounding the passing of the main character's father. Yeah, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't good, but it was a disappointment because I was really looking forward to that one. And I'm still at this crossroads where I'm like, I don't even know if I want to finish the series at this point because it just was so lackluster, and I really didn't feel any type of way towards it in terms of excitement or extreme hatred for it. So it's meh. So I probably won't finish the series, honestly. I'm kind of leaning in that direction a little bit. The next one is One to Watch. I recently read this one. I talked about this one in my mid-month wrap up for August, and holy crap. I just was so excited to read this because of the fact that there was this game show, reality show, not really game show, but reality show element of dating to it. And I love that there was going to be plus size representation looped into it. And I was like, yes, I need some good fat rep. And it was not that at all. It wasn't good fat rep to me. It really wrote the character into stereotypes that are usually placed on fat people or plus size people, and I didn't like that. And it wasn't so much about our main character B not knowing where she stood in terms of her own self-confidence. That didn't bother me because I've been there, done that, still struggle with that sometimes. I understand having to become confident for the world on the outside in order to survive and still not being 100% confident with yourself on the inside. I get that. I understand that aspect. I know that that was a development aspect, but that still was no reason for the author to write her into fat stereotypes. And I also didn't like that there were groups that were included into this book for diversity that were really tokens for diversity, and then they ended up being flat characters and not really well developed or well rounded. And I just feel like had she chosen maybe like one or two characters to focus on in terms of diversity, it would have been a lot better, because we had a black main character to me that ended up being whitewashed because we were just getting token aspects of him. He could have been any character, but we slapped the race of black on him to prove that black people could be a part of dating reality shows. It didn't work. I didn't care for it. I think that the reality aspect of it, the reality show part of it, was really good. It was fast paced. It kept me on, the edge of my seat, but there was too many technical issues in terms of representation that bothered me for me to even consider giving this 3 stars. So I ended up giving it 2, I believe, when I rated it. And what would this list be without the infamous Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer? Of course, this is going to be listed as one of the worst books for me of 2020. Yes, I'm talked about it enough. I'm not going to really talk about it anymore. I will like to say, people keep asking me like, why did you read it if you knew you weren't going to like it? Because I committed myself to a live show, y'all. I committed myself to reading these books and being part of a live show, and I could not be a part of these live shows and having these discussions with people if I did not read the books. So that's the reason why. Had it not been for my commitment that I did make to help out, I wouldn't have read them. Trust me, because as I said in the live shows, by the time I got to New Moon, I was already done. I wanted to DNF so badly every single time. But when I make a commitment, I stick with my commitments, and I felt that it was necessary in order for me to fully be engaged and have a serious conversation with the other members of this group, as well as the individuals that were coming to and discussing the books with us in the live show. Do I regret it? No, because it fostered some really great conversations. Will I ever read anything from Stephenie Meyer again? Absolutely not. I would not willingly read anything else from her, trust me. And I'm not a person that reads books to trash them. That's not my MO. I don't do that. And the last one on this list is one that I recently read as well. I don't think I've talked about this in a wrap-up yet, so you will see this before my final August wrap-up comes out, and that is Real Men Knit by Kwana Jackson. I did not like this. I did not like this. I was so looking forward to a contemporary romance by a Black author that focused on something unconventional like knitting, and not that knitting itself is unconventional, but the aspect of knitting being a primary focus of a romance is not something that I had encountered. I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed because I just feel like it wasn't well developed. It was not well developed at all. I felt like the characters were siblings as opposed to actual friends to lovers. I felt as though we were dealing with some immature characters as well that just could have been, I don't know, developed in a different way. Like Jessie, who is the main character, and this is so bad, this is how bad this book was that I can't even tell you whether that's truly his name, but I'm pretty sure that it is. He was just A1 player, didn't care about anybody but himself. When he was given the same energy that he exuded, it was one of those situations where it's like, oh, woe is me. And it was like, no, not woe is you. Like you've been a crap person. So I just didn't care for him as a main character. I liked the diversity. I loved the discussion on having a strong support for small business owners, especially those that are prominent in the Black community. But other than that, it was just not good. It wasn't good. I feel like nothing happened. It was boring. With a lot of these books that you'll see, this is a consistent theme with books that I just don't like for the year. Nothing happens in them. A lot of times it is just, there's nothing going on. And that's what makes them so dry. And Real Men Knit is no exception. Literally for the first, I would feel like 50-60% of this book, nothing happens. It felt like the same daily routine of her going to our main character, going into the shop with Jessie to be there to assist her. And that was it. Figuring out how to keep the shop going, opening up the shop, and Jessie sleeping with women. It was boring. It was so boring. I just, oh my gosh, it was so boring. And I was like 30% in, and I was like, do I DNF? Do I DNF? Do I DNF? Or just finish it. I have a very hard time DNFing. I always get this completion anxiety thing going on where like I feel compelled to finish books once I start them, and I wanted to DNF that one so bad and I didn't. But definitely one of the worst books I've read in 2020. Okay, so finally on to my favorites of 2020 so far. There is a likelihood that some of these could get bumped out of this list, or this list could just get longer, who knows. But some of them do have potential to get bumped out. So let's go ahead and jump in and talk about the best books of 2020 so far. So the first one that I have here is Ray Bear by Jordan Ifueko. I will not talk so much about this one because I do have a full review and a dreamcast of this one posted on my channel. But this is about a young girl by the name of Terasai, who is supposed to infiltrate the Crown Prince's Council of 11, and it's because she's been raised by this person called the Lady, who is supposed to be her mother, and the mother wants her to go in and kill the prince once she's made it on the council. And as a reader, you don't know why she wants that to happen, but you find out. And I think what I loved so much about this book is that it was just crazy. There was so much that happened, and especially in like the latter half of this book, that just blew my mind, that I did not see coming, that I absolutely loved. And I appreciated that this book, didn't have a love triangle like a lot of YA fantasy has been doing. I think some people now are getting the hint to kind of steer away from that. And B, it not only focused on romantic relationships, but also friendships. There was a huge emphasis on friendships in this book. And that was so good. It was so good. I love that aspect of it. And there were so many discussions about family and about these relationships that we have with our parental figures, and it was just great. The magic system is great. I cannot wait until the second book comes out, and I'm like, damn, I read the first book so quickly, so now I have to wait until the second one comes out. The next one that I have is This Is My America, which I need to get my hands on a copy of this one first of all, which I may get myself for my birthday. But This Is My America is absolutely hands down one of the top notch. If I had to go top 5 for 2020, This Is My America would definitely be on the list. So This Is My America focuses on a young girl by the name of Tracy, who's attempting to get her father off of death row after she has been wrongly convicted for a murder that he did not commit. And this is all proof that Tracy has, and stuff that's been discussed amongst witnesses that have come forward as possible alibis for her father. And this is a book that looks at mass incarceration from a different angle, which is why I love it so much. It focuses on how mass incarceration not only affects the individual that's being incarcerated, but then also the families that are left behind. And it has this discussion about how the black family, the nuclear black family, has never been what it should have been from the time of slavery. We come from generations of families that have been broken because that's how we started. When you think about what happened during the slave trade, how families were brought here and then completely torn apart, never to see each other again. And then you start throwing in things like mass incarceration centuries later. We've never had that opportunity to be a successful nuclear family. So I think that this really touches on that aspect in terms of mass incarceration, and it looks at so many different things, and it turns into kind of a mystery element when Tracy's brother is actually then accused of killing a white girl from his school, and she's running into this same cycle of black men and their treatment in the justice system, or lack thereof. If you have not picked up This Is My America, please pick it up. I know that I think some people were worried about it being compared to The Hate U Give and Dear Martin by Nick Stone, but this book is beautiful in its own right, and it is definitely looking at something completely different, where those two are really great insights to police brutality and the black experience in America. I think this definitely looks at mass incarceration, the black family unit, and the black experience all tied into one. The next one that I have here is The Deep by River Solomon, and I can't even begin to unpack this book, and I don't think I'm going to try to unpack this book because we did a 5-hour live show unpacking this book and talking about so many different things related to the black experience. So I'm just going to link that in the card symbol above because it was such an important conversation. I'm pretty sure that everybody knows the premise for this book, which is the fact that this is about a group of mermaids that are descendants from pregnant slaves that were thrown overboard. But let me just clarify that that is just the premise. That's it. It's not what this book is about completely. This book covers so much more, and it hands down, oh my goodness, definitely one of my favorites of the year. I need to reread it, but it's a difficult book and I'm not going to be rereading it anytime soon. I need to give myself a break because it's heavy. And to be just a novella, it is such a heavy book, but it is such a great book. The next one that I have is Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. This is another one that I need to get a physical copy of and reread because I listened to it on audio and I know that there were elements of this that I missed. But this is centering around a family, and it starts off with a young girl getting this dress for her coming out celebration, her time to be shown to society. I mean, that's a really pompous way to put it, but it was basically kind of like that, like a small cotillion type situation. And come to find out, her mother was supposed to wear the same dress and she never got the opportunity to wear the dress. And then we get thrown into this story of identity and how our past and how our lives are impacted and in some ways determined by the experiences of those that came before us. And it makes complete sense, but we're talking about Jacqueline Woodson here, so the beauty with which this book is written is unimaginable. The literary quality that comes out of Jacqueline Woodson is just amazing. She's amazing. She's an amazing human. So I expected nothing less, but I just didn't know what to expect in reading it. And it was such a beautiful story, a hard story in some parts, but you really do learn about the pieces and parts of this family and how they function together and why people have behaved the way that they have behaved. And you learn how things can end up being cyclical. Things are generational. What we experience helps us or deters us from impressing certain things upon those in which we end up looking after, whether they are our, biological children or not, or whether they're just young people that we are taking under our wing. And it is a super important conversation. So that's one that I definitely want to reread soon as well. I just need to get a physical copy because I think I need to annotate that one. The next one that I have here is Genesis Begins Again by Alicia D. Williams. This is another one that I have a review of on my channel, so I won't talk too much about it, but this is an exploration of colorism and texturism from the perspective of a young girl named Genesis who comes from a very, very broken home, very, very trauma-filled home. And this book is not a book that is about happy endings. It's not a sad ending, but it's not an ending where everything is tied up neatly in a bow and served on a platter. It definitely has some very, very difficult conversations, especially the way that colorism and texturism impacts the Black community and how it impacts our young Black children and how that just drives them to do certain things because mentally and emotionally it becomes too much. And that definitely happens with Genesis. There are a lot of trigger warnings in here for parental abuse that is both mental and emotional. There is abuse from a grandparent as well. There is some discussion of bleaching. There's bullying. It's a lot, but it is probably one of the most important books that you could read from a younger standpoint in terms of colorism. And as you can see, I mean, it's awarded up. I mean, it's Newbery Honor, Coretta Scott King, and William C. Morris Debut Award finalist. So very, very well done book. This is also one that I need to reread, but I'm going to need to be in the right mindset to reread this one as well because this is a tough one, but definitely a great one. If you want to know more, definitely check out that review that I have linked in the card symbol. And in the same vein, we have The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. And this is one that was also written with colorism in mind, except it touched a little bit more on the whole idea and concept of white passing. And it's about these two sisters who live in a town where everybody basically could pass for white, but the two sisters have different ideas of how they want to maintain their identity, and one decides to marry a dark-skinned man and the other decides to continue to pass for white and marry a white man. And we get to see their life experiences and how their lives have to be lived. And then we also get to see that from the experiences of their children. I think this book is a good conversation in terms of how painful white passing is, not only for the families that are left behind, but also the ones who have to end up in situations maintaining that level of white passing. Because of course, historically, if anybody find out that you're black and you're white passing, I mean, that's like a death sentence. It's also this conversation of having to give up your identity, your traditions, your culture. You see black people and you can't even relate to people who are like you, and then it becomes this cycle of people forgetting where they came from because you can't teach them stuff about an aspect of your life that you're trying to hide. So very, very complex novel, very, very great representation. I absolutely enjoyed it. I like Britt Bennett in general as an author, so this was no surprise, but that's also one that I want to reread. A lot of these on this list, I'm going to be honest, I want to reread, but I just have to be in this mindset to read them because a lot of these cover some pretty tough topics. The next one that I have is Anger is a Gift. I will be getting a copy of this one. I don't know when, but I think probably I'll buy myself a copy of this one for my birthday as well. And this is by Mark Oshiro, and this is about so much. This is a book that made me so emotional. It took me on an emotional roller coaster. I so thoroughly enjoyed this. It covers so many different topics like police brutality, the policing of schools. There was so much representation in this book that didn't feel tokenized. It just felt like the natural part of the characters. There were characters that were white, that were black, that were Latinx, characters that were bisexual, asexual, characters that were lesbian, characters that were non-binary. It just was so, it was done so organically, and I really appreciated that. And I really appreciate the conversation that Mark had in relation to policing schools and how dangerous it is to police schools and how it's detrimental to children to police schools, and that the schools that are policed are often the schools that are populated by black and brown children, and how that psychologically hurts them in the long run. So I could gush and gush and gush about that book. I'm just gonna stop there because it once again, if I had to do a top 5, this would be on that list. The next one that I have here is Grown. I actually have a full review of this one on my channel as well, and this is by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is her latest thriller-esque type book that focuses on a young girl by the name of Enchanted who aspires to be a singer, and she ends up with this R&B artist by the name of Corey, and Corey takes her under his wing, and it goes so downhill from there. A lot of what you read in this feels like it is inspired by the events that happened with R. Kelly, but I think that Tiffany D. Jackson has said that this happens a lot in any situation where we have this power dynamic that's being abused. And this is also a strong conversation about the fact that black girls and women are treated so differently in terms of reporting sexual assault, abuse, violence, anything that goes wrong with us. Even when we go missing, people don't care as much. And that's talked about a lot in this book, where police, the media, they don't care until it's somebody from a different race, and then everybody wants to listen. And how we're not believed, and how we are not taken seriously when we've been through some traumatic experiences. So we don't tell. We don't say anything. I think about the whole conversation surrounding Megan Thee Stallion. She didn't say anything. And a lot of times we don't say anything in protecting other people because we are not believed. People don't take us seriously. People don't see our trauma as being real. And it's such a hard conversation, but it is covered in here, and it's done so well. So check out that review. It's non-spoiler. I'm going to be rereading this again this month, and I'm so excited to get into it. The next one that I have on this list is Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds, and this one takes place over the course of an elevator ride from the top floor down to the bottom. this whole book, and it's written in verse, and it's about this young boy who is debating whether he wants to put himself into the cycle of violence after someone ends up killing his brother. He's out for revenge. He's ready to kill. He's not gonna snitch. He's not gonna tell anybody, but he's gonna get his revenge. And on his way down, he is visited by individuals who have been part of this cycle of violence. And it is such a powerful book in that Jason Reynolds is forcing readers to really understand that it's easy to judge these kids who end up in cycles of violence, who end up incarcerated in juvie, and think, oh my gosh, they're bad kids, but you have no idea the backstory. There was an author's note where he talked about there were kids who he visited that were in juvenile detention who ended up for perpetuating cycles of violence for things that had happened 40 years before they were even born. Imagine being looped into something that you have no knowledge of that happened 40 years before your birth, and you end up paying the consequences because nobody is there to teach you how to break the cycle. And that's what that's all about, is that be mindful of how you label and judge and talk about kids who are in these tough situations, because you don't know their background and you don't know what they've been through and why they're in the positions that they're in. And it's such a powerful book to be so short and to have been written in verse. And I listened to Jason Reynolds read it, and I'm glad that he did read it, because he wanted to make sure that everything, as far as like it being written in a poetry aspect, that even the cadences and whether he paused and stopped, everything that was done for effect was done by the original writer, and that there was no misconception of translation from page to audio. And I really appreciated that, and I loved it. I love Jason Reynolds. I'm a Jason Reynolds fan girl. So I definitely will be getting a copy of this. If you've never read Long Way Down, if you've never read Jason Reynolds, definitely give him a try. And the last one on this list, which is the only one that does not deal with a difficult topic of some kind or a tough, because all of these books that I've listed some more have dealt with tough topics and difficult conversations and have like tough relationships going on in them, but this one really was just for fun, and I really loved it. And it was Desperate Measures by Katie Robert, which is the Jasmine and Jafar retelling where they're actually together and they end up hooking up, and it's like these people that we know from Disney movies hooking up with villains. This was so good. It was so hot. It was so good. It was just pure bliss reading this book. And I have to admit, and I feel like I blush every time that I talk about this, because of the fact that it just had some really hot scenes in it, and it kind of ruined my childhood, because I was like, I never thought about Jafar like that. I never thought about Jasmine like that. But it's so interesting, and Aladdin actually is the villain, the actual villain. I mean, Jafar is the villain, but the actual bad person in the book is Aladdin, which I think is hilarious. If you want some really interesting romance books to check out, definitely check out this series. I love it. I forget the name of the series itself, but the first one is Desperate Measures, and each subsequent book focuses on individuals that are actually part of some type of Disney movie hero and villain type of situation. And it was my first time experiencing certain types of kinks, and I enjoyed a couple of them more than I thought. So I don't know what this says about me. All right, y'all, so that is it. Those are the worst and the best books that I've read of 2020 so far. It's going to be really interesting comparing these lists when I actually do the final videos in December for my definite list of my favorites and the ones that I absolutely did not like. So yeah. All right, let me know in the comments below, like, what are some of your favorite books of this year? What are some books that you really disliked of this year? Are there any books that I listed that you really want to read? Are there books that I listed in the worst that you really liked, or the ones that I listed in the best that you really don't like? That's such a tongue twister. But yeah, as always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. If you're looking for ways to support my channel, the links will be down in the description box, as well as links to my social media. And I'll be back with another video soon. Bye.